Although, as it happens, I do have a particular love of Indian dance, and thank you, Privti, for that wonderful performance. And thank you for being here. It's great to see such a stylish and important group of people in the Science Museum. We're here, of course, to celebrate an Indian festival and a goddess, but also we wanted to tell you about something the Science Museum is up to this year, which we think is, if I may be modest, really important and rather audacious, because there are two things very interesting about 2017. In fact, there are three, and I will reveal the third shortly, but the two things that are publicly known is, first of all, 2017 is the UK-India Year of Culture, which is obviously a very important event. It's also, of course, 70 years since Indian independence. And we're going to celebrate that way, those two important events in a number of ways. Now, the point I really want to make immediately is many of you may be used to art museums celebrating Indian culture. Well, it's about time the Science Museum showed respect for an amazing civilization. And absolutely right. We're going to celebrate in four ways. The first is there will be in the autumn a major exhibition about Indian photography from the 19th century to the modern age. Both British and Indian photographers, a great distinction, will be in that exhibition. We'll also be having an exhibition about the history of Indian science, and I'm going to say more about that in a moment. But we'll also be having wonderful lakes events for the enormous audience of young adults who come to the Science Museum, and also, I hope, lots of song, poetry and dance as well. Now, let me just say something about science, because it's obviously a burning passion for me. The exhibition, which will be in the big gallery behind you, looks at the history of science in India and India's contribution to world history and science. And by India, I don't mean India since 1947 or British India, I mean the vast history of India as a civilization. And I wanted to give you just three examples of just how ambitious this exhibition is, and to give you an example of three sources of the material for this project. And the first is, of course, India itself. So at the end of last year, I had the pleasure of being in Delhi, but also in Dehradun, in the north of India, visiting a really remarkable institution, which is the Survey General of India. And that is relevant because also, as it happens, in 2017, that extraordinary scientific organisation is 250 years old. And when I met the Surveyor General, I thought, oh dear, this is going to be a nightmare, because he's going to say, I would love to lend to you, but alas, I'm committed to projects in India. And the first thing he said to me was, how wonderful if the Science Museum borrowed our objects, because then people in India know about us, but the whole world needs to know about one of the most extraordinary scientific organisations in the world. And two things to say about that. One is that we'll be borrowing the great theodolite, which was one of the star objects in the Great Survey of India in the 19th century. But we're also doing something really important about scholarship and fact. Because when you think of the great 19th century project, people tend to think of Sir George Everest. Yes, him as in the mountain. But in fact, there were so many extraordinary Indian mathematicians. And I have a confession. They were once in the story, and the British wrote them out. Boo. Terrible thing to do, but now the Science Museum is writing them back into history, because some of these mathematicians were extraordinary figures of global significance. The second place we're borrowing from is very near the Science Museum, which is one of the world's greatest libraries, which is the Bodleian in Oxford. And they have one of the most important objects, not only in the history of science, but in the history of anything, which is the Blatchford manuscript. Now, many of you will know about this extraordinary document discovered in the late 19th century. It's the oldest written record showing India's enormous contribution to mathematics, and perhaps one of the most extraordinary concepts in all humanity, which is the concept of zero. Yeah, exactly, extraordinary. Now, some of you will know that this manuscript is incredibly difficult to see. It's incredibly fragile, it's very light sensitive. When I went to see the head of the Bodleian Library, he thought that since 1890, when it entered the collection, It's probably been lent once. So I thought he would say no, but in fact, I'm delighted to tell you that we are borrowing parts of the Blatchford manuscript for our exhibition. And even better, we've agreed with Oxford an extraordinary scientific project to, for the first time, undertake research on the date of the manuscript. Now, the point about that, it matters for the history of India, but it's of world significance as well. Now, my final example might surprise you, also borrowing some extraordinary things from Jerusalem. Now, you might think, Jerusalem, that seems rather surprising. But those of you who know about the history of science will know that S.N. Bose in the 20th century was one of the greatest physicists of that period, and famously was much admired and had a very friendly relationship with Einstein, who was a great admirer of his work. Now, in the Einstein archive in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem are extraordinary letters between these two great men. And I remember the occasions when the curator said to me, "Oh, please, it would be a dream beyond belief to borrow these," but of course they'll say no. Now, I can see the Deputy High Commissioner looking at me, and he knows that I don't understand the word no. It seems to me a most unfortunate concept. So we asked, and they said yes. So this extraordinary set of correspondence will also be here. So I hope I can convey, just in those three examples, extraordinary things, but also you will see on the table at the side there that we also have some wonderful objects in our collection. Now, another key thing I just want to stress is this is about the beginning of a long-term strategic relationship between this museum and India. And the reason I say that is when we visited great historic collections in India and also some of the great commercial enterprises, every single organisation has said to us, "We think that you can help preserve the great historic scientific collections of India and spread the word. And so rather than you be diffident about being bossy and interfering English people, actually, come on, let's work together to actually make an enormous sea change in the world understanding the history of India's contribution to science." So this is obviously about a great one-off event, but also about really a fundamental contribution that both Britain and India can make to world history. And in fact, the exhibition is so important that we want to make the exhibition free, because we think that it's such an important occasion, both for people in Britain who have Indian heritage, but also the vast audience that comes here. Now, some of you know this, but 3.4 million people a year come to the Science Museum, and more school children than any other museum in Britain. So if you want them to know something about India, you should be in favour of this project. And so let me close by really asking you to do two things. And the first is very simple. Tell everyone what we're doing. Okay, that's an easy thing to do, but every single person you can think of, you must tell them that a major event is happening here in the autumn. But also, I would ask you that if as an individual or a company or as a foundation, you want to be involved in making this project happen, both to support bringing all these objects here, but also in marketing this project, we would love you to help as well. Now, before I pass on to the next speaker, some of my colleagues here know, as indeed the Deputy High Commissioner knows, that I have a slightly strange sense of humour, so you have to endure this, because when I read my briefing note about the goddess we're celebrating tonight, it said that worshipping her brings enlightenment through knowledge. But much more interesting to me was the following, and I'm now going to issue an order to everyone in the Science Museum that this goddess must be worshipped, because apparently, if you do so, you rid yourself of lethargy, sluggishness, and ignorance. It seems to me those are three wonderful things to avoid. So, thank you for being here. Our other speakers this evening are the Indian High Commissioner and Dame Mary Archer, my chairman. But can I also particularly welcome not only the Indian High Commissioner, but the Deputy High Commissioner, and I see Sir Kiran Devan, the Director of the British Council, is also here. I hope you're getting the message. This is a very important event. And once again, a very warm welcome. And can I ask His Excellency to come to the stage and say a few words?